After the war, civil rights came to the forefront of America's attention. Roosevelt had banned discrimination in defense industries during the war in 1941. An American Dilemma by Gunnar Myrdal was written in 1944, and also African Americans returning home from abroad refused to accept discrimination after their service. These events led to the rise of the civil rights movement. Momentum was built in that with the break of the racial sports barrier by Jackie Robinson and the development of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. Many African Americans were in support of this, but there was also a large number of white people who did not support this. Lots of violence broke out in the South. Most of it was on black veterans just trying to vote. Truman started the Committee on Civil Rights. They were tasked with the investigation of race relations. They came up with many ideas to improve equality. Those ideas were, however, shot down by Truman's lack in congressional support. He did accomplish the desegregation of the military through his executive powers. The 40s were a strong time for the movement, but it began to slow in the 50s. The NAACP failed to get Congress to make lynching a federal crime. This led them to turning their efforts to litigation in the federal courts. With the large number of black and white supporters of any civil rights organization, they pursued the legality of segregation with a team of black and white attorneys and lawyers. They won many cases like Sweat versus Painter. Texas had an unlawful separate but unequal blacks law school. And they also won McLaren versus Oklahoma State regions. Oklahoma denied McLaren equal access to all school facilities. These wins led them to the ultimate challenge, the desegregation of all public schools.
The Brown versus Board of Education case was a complicated matter in that it challenged the verdict of Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the conclusion allowed legal segregation. The case took place in Topeka, Kansas, an area in which legal segregation was present at the time. On behalf of the NAACP, 13 Topeka parents of 20 students challenged the Board of Education to end the school's district's policy of segregation. The daughter of the main challenger, Oliver L. Brown, had to walk 6 blocks simply to get to her bus stop to get to the black elementary school a mile away, while the white school was only 7 blocks from their place of residency. The case was presented in the spring of 1953, but due to a disagreement among the justices, it was reheard in the fall of the same year. The justices involved in the case were Felix Frankfurter, Hugo Black, Chief Justice Earl Warren, Stanley F. Reed, William O. Douglas, Tom C. Clark, Robert H. Jackson, Harold H. Burton, Sherman Minton, and of these justices, Douglas, Black, Burton, and Minton had already decided to give their opinions towards overturning the Plessy decision. In the final decision, 5 court cases were involved: Brown itself, Briggs v. Elliott, Davis v. County School Board of Prince Edward County, Gebhardt v. Belton, filed in Delaware, and Bolling v. Sharp. On May 17, 1954, Supreme Justice Earl Johnson delivered the unanimous decision that declared that the state-sanctioned segregation was unconstitutional against the 14th Amendment.
The result of the Brown case still remains to this day one of the most significant and controversial decisions in American history. Because public education touched so many Americans, it had a much greater impact on cases involving only professional and graduate schools. Moreover, by overturning the principle of separate but equal, the court lent its support to the views of many civil rights advocates that all forms of segregation are wrong. This helped lead to a separate ruling known as Brown II, where the court called for the implementation of its decision with all deliberate speed across the nation. Shortly thereafter, the Little Rock 9 incidents took place, in which 9 black students enrolled in a formerly all-white Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in September of 1957. However, many Southerners had no intention of desegregating their schools without a fight, which proved to cause quite a bit of trouble for the Little Rock 9. Furthermore, the Ku Klux Klan staged a revival. Many prominent white Southerners and businessmen organized white citizens' councils that declared that the South would not be integrated. The citizens' councils imposed economic and political pressure against those who favored compliance with the Supreme Court's decision. Despite these difficulties, the Brown decision revolutionized the United States in terms of equality and will forever go down in history as a turning point in the civil rights movement.
In today's world, it is safe to say that we as a society have come a long way in integrating different races together to form equality. However, perfect worlds do not exist, and we still see forms of discrimination in the most subtle forms. In our current school system, the SAT and ACT are 2 standardized tests that are required by most colleges for entry. These tests, however, possess subtle forms of discrimination hidden within the roots of the tests and the questions they pose.
The College Board, the runner of this most used standardized test, SAT, states that their tests are fair to all students. Considering that College Board praises itself on the equality of the SAT, it is concerning that evidence has proven that it is an unequal way of comparing students due to its prejudice against poor and minority students. According to William C. Hiss, former Dean of Admissions and professor at Bates College, and Valerie Franks, former Assistant Dean of Admissions alongside Hiss, the SAT and ACT quality limits diversity in the students accepted. They suggest increasing the trend of test-optional admissions as a way to promote diversity. When looking at the individual students that they studied, they realized that the majority of the students are minorities. This brings to light that the SAT and ACT may be biased against minorities, which has caused them to not get into college. Thomas J. Eppenshade, a professor of sociology at Princeton, and Chang-Young Chung, a statistical programmer at Princeton, further assert that the tests themselves may favor wealthier students because the questions are written and evaluated by privileged individuals who may inadvertently include class-based knowledge, not just common knowledge, in the exam. For example, some questions may be more easily answered if the student has a background information about golf rather than basketball. As Espenshade further detailed, reliance on the SAT in college admissions favors applicants who are white and or wealthier than other applicants. Preparatory resources compiled with a more prestigious learning environment and teacher quality overall results to higher testing scores. Families on the lower end of socioeconomic status often stray from expensive resources. According to Espenshade, this effect has been seen in African American or Latino communities who do not have access to these resources, creating an unfair advantage. At this point, it becomes evident that the economic inequality has affected perceptions of student potential. Cooper Aspengren, a writer for The Oracle, a newspaper publication produced to inform the public on current changes in the educational field, believe that disadvantaged test takers simply cannot afford the benefits of SAT, ACT preparation services in the form of private tutors or classes that cost thousands of dollars. It becomes evident that without outside resources to prepare for the test, disadvantaged students cannot receive the same increase in test scores that their more privileged peers can.
When examining the implications of standardized tests, one of the largest problems associated with them is a lack of equity towards minorities and the impoverished. Scott Josiek, a renowned voice in higher education, states that limiting the emphasis on the SAT and ACT would result in significant ethnic and economic gains. By limiting the importance of these standardized tests, colleges would open up to minority students and experience much more racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity. Due to the possible ways race and socioeconomic status can affect people taking standardized tests, limiting the emphasis put on them would help everyone have a more equal chance when applying to colleges. Therefore, similar to the decision made in Brown versus Board of Education, implementing this solution would help integrate schools and provide equal opportunities for people of all backgrounds.
The SAT and ACT are designed to accurately predict a student's potential for success at collegiate levels. A study found that high school GPA has a slightly higher correlation of 0.54 to freshman year GPA in comparison to the correlation of 0.53 with the SAT. While the test should not be used by itself, it is clear that it will raise the ability for the admission board to evaluate a student rather than hinder it. Many people argue that the policy of superscoring tests gives students who take the test more than once an advantage over those who only take it once. However, from the data collected, the authors found that despite how many times a student took the SAT, the predictive validity of the SAT remained in the same range. No matter how many times a student took the test, colleges were still able to effectively predict a student's academic potential. In comparison to high school GPA, college admission tests are equally effective in predicting a student's first-year college GPA and should still be used.